All right. Would you want to live in that type of time period again?
Um, it it was a very interesting time period. I was married at the time, and there was a lot of unrest and everything. But I think in the long run, it was good for the country because the country got to face the problems at home and abroad, and foreign policy and everything. Uh, I don't think I think a lot of people wouldn't want to go through it again, but I particularly wouldn't mind it because, like I said, I think it was a learning experience. It was a lot of things changed for the better that came out of that period of time during the Vietnam War, all the protests and the racial discriminations and the college uproars and everything else. A lot of positive things came out of it later on. So in the long run, I think it was good for the country, but very difficult.
All right. How big was the Vietnam War, would you say?
Um, as far as big in size of numbers, I don't know those actual numbers, but there was a lot of countries involved in it. We had Australian troops over there. We had South Korean troops. We were involved in Laos, Cambodia, Thailand. We had bases over there. All the military bases in Japan, Okinawa, the Philippines. So there was a lot of countries involved. It was a major undertaking as far as the flow of supplies and men and women. It was a big war in the sense of a lot of, like I said, a lot of different countries being involved in it. And like I mentioned before, there was casualties of, I think it was 58,000 men and women, plus thousands injured. But North Vietnam suffered worse. There was something like 5 million casualties from North Vietnam, so it was pretty bad. So.
All right. Where did you live during the Vietnam War?
I lived initially, as I mentioned, I was on station in Taiwan and Okinawa in the Philippines. But then I came back to Texas and I was stationed down there for a while. And at that time I decided to leave the Air Force and came back to Massachusetts and lived, where again there was a lot of protesting and anti-war feeling. A lot of people went to Canada, conscientious objectors they call them. Good example, Muhammad Ali, formerly Cassius Clay, the fighter, was a conscientious objector. He was against the war in Vietnam, so he refused to go, as a conscientious objector. And so there was a lot of that, people leaving the country and stuff. But I remained in Massachusetts after I got out and joined the Air Force, active Air Force Reserve at Hanscom Air Force Base in Massachusetts.
All right. Did you know anyone who served in the Vietnam War?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, my brother-in-law was in there. He was a paratrooper in Vietnam. I knew quite a few Marines who were in combat, and they briefly talked about their exploits over there. I knew some Air Force personnel who were stationed there at the different air bases. And yeah, it was not uncommon to know people, even your next door neighbor, that this was somehow involved and had a a relative that was in it, or something, because there was so many people involved in it at the time.
All right. What was your opinion of the war, and did it change?
My opinion of the war, initially I was very supportive and everything. But things started to change. I think what happened is because of like I mentioned earlier, the limited objective. We were not allowed to do what we do best. Okay. So it was a very limited war. Things that we could do, the countries we could fly out of and stuff, and on that basis it became a losing proposition. Eventually, that's why we ended up leaving Vietnam, because it became there's no way we can win this war by just going around the enemy and just bombing or attacking certain areas of the country and leaving others, flourishing. And so it was very ill-planned. It was not the military's fault. It was the politicians in Washington who were giving in to political pressure from around the world. And a lot of, after a U.S. bombing in Hanoi and places like that, there would be cameramen from other countries like France and everything, and they'd show you how the U.S. bombed a daycare center with children in it and stuff, and they'd show you the kids that were dying and stuff, So worldwide opinion really was against the U.S. later in the war because of these kind of things that were coming out. And the communists used that propaganda. It wasn't all propaganda, it was really real happening. They used that propaganda against us, and it worked very well. Made us look like a bunch of thugs, And that's why the war was limited, because we couldn't just go right out and defeat the enemy. We had to watch out for the civilians and all this other stuff going on.
All right. Did you do anything to support your opinion?
Yes, I did. Like I said, after I got out of the regular Air Force, within a few years I joined the Air Force Reserve, Hanscom Air Force Base, and the Vietnam War was still going on. And this was my way of showing support for the U.S. And we wanted to support the troops, the men who were fighting over there, not necessarily the political outlook of things were going on, but you want to support the men and women who are actually doing the job, because they're just doing their job, And I can remember going to the meetings, the reserve meetings, and walking into a diner to get a coffee with an Air Force uniform on, fatigues, and people booing and everything, So it was very difficult times, because they didn't want anything to do with the military. They looked at it as taking us down the wrong road and everything, But I continued to do my job, and I felt good about it, and I would do the same thing. So.